conflict is a process, as everything in our life. It is a process. It's something that has a start, a beginning, and it may have an evolution. If we are talking about a conflict here, this process may have a happy ending or a sad ending. Again, this is all up to us. Conflict might be struggle, incompatibility, probably different perceptions, different ways of task completing, even different cultures. Family issues arise just a lot because of misperceptions or misunderstandings. Sometimes we believe that just because I know my siblings, or just because I know my mom and my dad, and I know how they think, I know how they react, I might be in advance creating a situation that is what my expectations are based on that knowledge I had from my family members. But remember, we don't deal with averages, we don't deal with a formula, we deal with people. Even when I know my mother, my father, my siblings, and I know their values, I think I know the way they think about things, doesn't mean that they might not be that they are in a bad mood, that they having a new learning experience, they approaching things differently that they did how they did it in the past. So we have to be careful and just don't assume, just because I know people, how things are going to be approached. The best way, and we're going to talk about this later, is to use assertive communication. Ask. Always ask before reacting. Responses to conflict. There is a soft response to conflict, a hard, and a principle. Soft, we have some examples here. Withdrawing, ignoring, denying, giving in. Sometimes, under certain circumstances, that's the way we should approach things. And here is when we have to start thinking, a little bit mature and try to distinguish when we need to use a soft response to conflict in order to approach it properly. A hard, of course, it's never desired, because here we're going to be talking about threatening, pushing, hitting, yelling, for example. You're probably going to be in the juvenile system if you do something like that, so you be careful. You think twice before you lose your temper. Principle is listening, understanding, respecting, and resolving. So we mainly want to use as response to conflict are soft and principles responses, and all the time try to avoid those hard responses to conflict. In order to be problem solvers, we need to take a second and think how that other person is feeling. What is the perspective of the other person? Even if I truly believe they're wrong and I'm right, I still need to sit for a second and think about it if I want to be a problem solver. Explosive, angry, hurtful, resentful reactions, all those are unhealthy behaviors that we need to prevent all the time. Because if we don't do, we're going to be part of the problem, and we don't want that. Healthy, it is the opposite, the capacity to recognize and respond to other people's issues, other people's interests, acting in a calm, non-defensive, and in a respectful way. That's the healthy way to approach conflict. Sometimes we need to compromise in order to solve conflict. Sometimes we need to receive, but we also need to give in a little bit. There are some conflict resolution tools that can help us to better approach conflict. and have a happy ending. First of any conflict tool, stress management. If we are in a bad mood and someone comes to us in a bad mood also, that is going to create an escalation of the conflict. Why? Because none of us are going to be able to deal properly with the situation. How do we manage stress? The first thing we need to know is how to detect our stress symptoms. That is really important. Sometimes we are under real huge stress and overreact to certain situations, and that's not okay at all. Anger management, really important. There's more and more youth getting into teen court just because they don't know how to deal with anger, and we have to be careful about that. How do we deal with anger? We need to recognize our triggers, our red flags. That doesn't mean that just because I recognize my triggers and I let that other person know what are those triggerings, I just have the right to allow me to attack that person just because that person didn't consider what my triggers were. I need to make sure what my triggers are in order to avoid escalation of the conflict, not to put that responsibility on others. For example, I told you I didn't like that, and that's why I react that way. That's why I push you. That's why I hit you. Because I told you, you knew. That's wrong. We recognize our triggers in order to deal with anger, in order to prevent escalation, in order to cool off and get away from the situation until we cool off. For example, really important to tell someone before we lose control. That is really important. Our problems, but on the other hand, we need to share sometimes what is it that is going on. Probably an expert, probably a psychologist, a counselor, a mother, a father, grandfather, siblings, someone you trust. Walk away from the situation until you cool off. It is really critical you don't stay in a place when you feel like you're losing your temper. That is a big key for anger management. It is the best approach to tell that person, I'm gonna leave now and we're gonna talk later, even if that person get offended because that person had the sensation that you didn't care. That's gonna be a better approach because in the future that person is gonna be able probably to understand you and forgive you about that. But if you attack that person, first, you're gonna lose probably that person. Second, you're gonna get in trouble. That doesn't worth it. So it's really important we walk away from situations that are heat until we cool off. Exercise our body, really important to let flow all that energy we have out of anger, for example. Take deep breath, breathing exercise. People don't do that often, but that's a great tool for anger management. Understand ourselves. Explore our feelings and concerns with a trust family, mental health professional, friend. Make myself important. That is really important. I am important, so I'm gonna take care of me. I'm not gonna lose my temper because if I lose my temper, then I'm gonna have some bad consequences there for me and my family. Plan solutions, really important. When we cool off, we're able to sit down, make a list for planning. Prioritize. We need to prioritize. Sometimes we make a list and we start by the less important thing and forget about the critical thing that we need to take care of. So prioritize is part of anger management and part of conflict resolution. Enjoy with friends, families, hobbies, really important. Rethink, recognize, and label our angry feelings, as I said before. Emphasize with that other person what is it that is bothering me. Again, I don't do that just to warn that person not to behave that way. I do that just to let that person know what my triggers are and have a good way of communication. On the other hand, I'm responsible of controlling myself. Try to see the situation from other people's perspectives. What is she feeling? What is he feeling? Have I had similar feelings? We need to take a moment to think about. And most important, trying to determine when we sit and take a moment to think about whether I need professional assistance or not. Some people believe that professional counseling perhaps is for unstable, emotional stable people, for insane people. That is not true. Professional counseling, behavioral professionals are people trained to modify undesired behaviors. Those behaviors I don't even like about me. They are trained to help us to modify those behaviors. Family mediation. People doesn't know too often about what family mediation is. I am a certified family and county court mediator, and I can tell you that my experiences mediating for families has been wonderful. That's one of the reasons why I'm here today, to talk about family mediation. Family mediation is a consensual process. It might be court order, might be voluntary. Even if it's court order, it's still voluntary. The outcome of the issue remain in control of the both persons in conflict. So that's wonderful. When we're talking about court order mediation, and even again, if it's not court order, it is regulated by law. So if you reach an agreement under family mediation, it is binding. So that's wonderful, because you can use that as a preventive tool, and that might help you save a lot of trouble. Okay? Peer mediation for those conflicts you have at school, college, excellent tool. Mediation, it is about negotiation, and it is assisted by a third neutral party. That person, probably it would be a good idea if that person it is a certified family or county mediator. Why? Because if that person is certified, that person is more likely that is going to have the tools to assist you as a third neutral party. Okay? To neutralize recalcitrant behavior, to provide you with a source of ways to deal with your issues. It's going to give you alternatives. It's going to be creative. It's going to probably assist you to see things from others' perspectives. And that's really helpful sometimes. Conflict coaching. When both parties are not able to mediate because one of them doesn't want to mediate and the other one wants to mediate so bad, you can still use conflict coaching. A conflict coach is a person certified to provide you with tools on how to deal with toxic people. And that is really important, because unfortunately that's our daily bread. We sometimes need to deal with toxic people, but we don't want to become toxic too, because if we have two toxic people, this is not going nowhere. Family and individual counseling. Sometimes people, especially teenagers, believe that if they go to family counseling, they don't need to deal with their individual issues. That is not correct. You have to make sure that if you're going to have family counseling, you talk to that counselor and make sure that you don't have some individual issues that you need to cope first before you can go to the second stage of the conflict resolution.